Welcome to the very exclusive and intimate event tonight. Thank you all for coming. So yes, welcome to the two-part debate. Part one first for the two Lamoille House seats. We will also, Green Mountain Access Television is recording this, so for anyone who couldn't be here, which I suspect is a few people who live here, it will be available online as soon as they get that turned around. So the first part, the Lamoille-Washington House District, which is Elmore, Morristown, Woodbury, and Worcester, has 2 House seats, and both incumbents from Morristown, Republican Gary Nolan and Democrat Dave Yacovone, are running for re-election. Also running is Avram Patt, a Democrat from Worcester who held one of the House seats from 2014 to 2016, and 2 will be elected in November. So a couple ground rules before we start. Thank you all for participating in this. So we will have each candidate make an opening statement of up to 2 minutes. We'll choose the order at random, and we'll keep the order circulating so it's not the same order every time. And then we will pose several questions to the candidates. These were generated by us and by voters, so we hope they'll be interesting and informative to answer and to listen to. Opportunities for rebuttals will be at our discretion if you want to say something directly. And then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So whatever is on your mind, come on up and and keep it civil, please. This is a debate between the candidates, not the candidates and the audience. So no speeches, please. And then candidates will have up to 2 minutes each for closing statements. So any questions from the candidates over here? Okay, so, I am Hannah Normandeau. I'm the managing editor of the News and Citizen, Stowe Reporter, and Waterbury Record. I live in Waterbury right now. And this is Tommy Gardner, news editor and reporter for the News and Citizen, Stowe Reporter, and Waterbury Record. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with him. He asks you a lot of questions. Can I say anything, Tommy?
That's my family in the front row. Hi, family.
And Tommy lives in Morrisville. He just bought a house last year. 2 years with Kristen. Wow. So, homeowners and taxpayers. Yeah. So I guess first I will introduce these gentlemen, and then we'll go in this order as we have them here for their opening statements. So Gary Nolan is a Republican from Morristown. He was born in Jeffersonville. He graduated from Cambridge Schools and then went to VTC. He was drafted into the Army, served more than a year in Korea before honorable dischargement. He worked in heavy and highway construction since high school, and he's worked for H.A. Minash since 1976. He is general manager of the aggregate division. He's been in Morrisville since 1986. He's been a DRB member for 25 years and chair for the last 20. He's a member of Morrisville Rotary, long time, and a past president, lifetime member of the VFW Post 9653, and a 25-year member of the Morrisville American Legion. He's also a past vice president of the Associated General Contractors of Vermont and served on the legislative committee for that. And most importantly, was president of the Lamoille Area Adult Men's Softball League for several years. Take it away, Gary.
Thank you for that great introduction. And I want to thank the News and Citizen for putting on this debate and for hosting it. I think hopefully everybody will get the questions answered that they came here to get answered. And I'm running again because I really enjoyed the last 2 years down there in Montpelier, being an advocate for things for our district. I am on the Transportation Committee, and I've been working, actually throughout the summer, we've had several meetings on the airport, economic development issues for the airport, which I believe are moving along very well. I think it's a big plus for our area. And proposals for the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail goes through the Transportation Committee, and myself and Senator Westman, who is also on Transportation Committee in the Senate, were able to secure some funding for matching grants for the continuation of the rail trail. This time it's not going to be in our district, but eventually it's all going to connect, and I think it's a huge economic development issue for us as it goes. Well, it's going to go from Swanton to St. Johnsbury upon completion, so and the thing really gets a lot of traffic, a lot more than I would have anticipated when they built it, and it's great for the area. Also, I'd like to go back again, and I want to work on permit reform, which is another huge issue for economic development in our area and in the state, and along with the recreation, that we're losing a lot of recreation dollars to state of New Hampshire for various reasons, and I'd like to work on those as well. I'm going to leave it at that and see what we get for questions.
And next up at the table, we have Representative Dave Yacovone. He's a Democrat from Morristown. Dave is an incumbent. He currently serves on the House Committee on Appropriations. Dave is a Johnson State College grad. Do you still call it Johnson State College? Or do you call it Northern Vermont University Johnson Campus now? He spent his 40-year career in Vermont working in health and human services at the local and state level. He's a licensed nursing home administrator and has served as the Commissioner of Aging and Disabilities in the Dean administration and Commissioner for the Department of Children and Families in the Shumlin administration. Dave's been a town moderator, a select board member, a school board member, a justice of the peace, and a planning commissioner. He's volunteered with Community Health Services of Lamoille Valley, Lamoille Home Health, and Lamoille Mental Health Services. He currently serves as a trustee for Copley Hospital and the Manor Nursing Home. Take it away, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you, folks, for sponsoring this tonight. Thanks for sharing the clock now, too. I was going to share with you my background and experiences, but Tommy did a pretty good job at it, so I'll focus on something else. Let me share with you why I'm seeking re-election. Muhammad Ali once said, "The service we do for others is the rent we pay for our good place here on earth." The rent is due, and I want to pay it forward. I want to give back to my community in any way I can. I certainly don't pretend to have all the answers. I surely don't know what everybody feels, but I just would do my best to listen and to weigh all the facts and to try to be helpful as much as I can be. It's really no more complicated than that to me. Public service is important. To me, it's a calling, not so much a profession. I have the time to serve. I retired a couple of years ago, and when I did shortly thereafter, my wife, I think fearful that I would be home a lot, urged me to run for office. Maybe she wanted to get me out, and she did. I have the time. I take this as a full year, full-time responsibility in helping people, and I get all kinds of calls and questions in the off session and do my very best with those. When I ran 2 years ago, I said that my hope was to be on the Appropriations Committee, and some people, I think, thought I was naive to think an incoming legislator, though I had served 4 years in the 90s, would be able to do very much. But I've really enjoyed that work and hope to go back and do more of it to protect our pocketbooks and protect the vulnerable wherever I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Can you see this clock okay? Does that work? Okay. And then next up we have Avram Patt, who is a resident of Worcester since 1989, moved to Central Vermont in 1970, and before that he was born in the Bronx. He's running for another term. He was elected to the House in 2014, but was edged in 2016 in a 5-way race. He attended Columbia College, got a BA from Goddard College, and he retired in 2013 after more than 16 years as general manager of the Washington Electric Co-op. He's presently consulting in energy nonprofits and cooperatives, and is currently president of the Salvation Farms Board in Morrisville. He was director of the Office of Economic Opportunity and held other Agency of Human Services positions for 10 years. Before that, he was coordinator of the agency that developed many of the public transportation services now operating in central Vermont. And he served on many nonprofit and government boards at the community, state, and national levels. Thank you, Avram.
Thank you, and good evening, and also thanks to the News and Citizen for sponsoring this. As was mentioned, I did serve one term as a representative for this district. At that time, the other representative representing us was Shap Smith. It was a complicated and close election last time, and after the election, a lot of people in all four towns asked me to think about running again. I did a very good job of not thinking about that for about a year and a half, but then I decided that I would do that. In the time that I did serve, I learned a lot, although in my jobs, some of which were mentioned, I had spent a fair amount of time in the State House, some amount of time pretty much every year for many years. So I kind of knew what I was getting myself into, the compromises, the hurry up and wait, working very, very hard on an important issue all session long, and it's watching it all go up in flames in the last week. I knew that would happen. Some of it did happen. And one of the reasons I ran, people say to me, I could never do that. And I say to them, then don't. I have the kind of a temperament, I think, that can work well in that environment, and I'm interested in serving again. An awful lot has changed in the last 2 years since I served. We have a new governor and new administration in Vermont, of course, but even more has changed at the federal level, and I'm very concerned about the effect of federal funding decisions, the unraveling of federal regulations and programs that will affect Vermont. And unfortunately, I think in the coming session and maybe beyond that, it will be the job of legislators individually and as a group to see if and how we can respond to those kind of mostly negative changes. I'm not sure we can, but we owe it to ourselves to see if we can. So I'm running to represent all four towns in the district, and appreciate being here and waiting for the questions.
All right. This House district is it really is the you can't get there from here district. I mean, you have two very small towns in Washington County, Woodbury and Worcester, and then you have the largest town in Lamoille County, Morristown, and you have a small town in Lamoille County, Elmore. How would you describe the difference between what the constituents in those small towns like Woodbury, Worcester, and Elmore want, and what the constituents in Morristown want, and how do you kind of please both of those parties? Dave Yacovone, go first.
There are a lot of similarities. People want to be able to pay their bills. They want to be able to take care of their families. They want to be safe. They want to be able to have a decent life in their communities, whether they're in the back hills of Woodbury or in the village of Morrisville. They worry about paying their health care bills, whether they're a young family or whether they're an elder senior citizen struggling to make ends meet. While Morrisville may have different issues because it's the hub of the county than some of the smaller towns, and it does economic development, and it has industrial parks, and there's an airport, there's more of an economic engine, if you will. But that doesn't mean that the little towns, the smaller towns, Elmore, Worcester, and Woodbury, aren't just as passionate about that. Woodbury folks are very concerned about the large trucks that rifle through Route 14 and just wearing that road down over and over. Both Woodbury and Worcester worry greatly about preserving the uniqueness of their small schools, which are threatened. I've said to folks, it's one thing if a community wants to downsize or close their school. It's entirely a different thing if the state of Vermont tries to muscle a closure by forcing them out. And next year, and I think if I'm reelected, I'll be poised to fight the good fight. I don't mean to use fighting, it sounds good, doesn't sound good, but to advocate very strongly for those towns, because the state of Vermont spends $7 million plus on what are called small school grants. It's about $65,000 to Worcester, $65,000 to Woodbury. Elmore now is co-aligned with Morrisville, so it's a little bit different. Those small school grants, that may sound like small money to some. It's critical, however, because it's a couple of points on the tax rate. The state has said that they want to eliminate them by fiscal year 20. I don't support that. I'm looking at the clock. Do I have 2 minutes?
Yes, we're at 10 seconds left.
I got 10 seconds left really quickly. If you want to ruin the economic vitality of rural Vermont, close the schools. Good luck if you own a home with 2 or 3 bedrooms, a family home, and you try to sell it when your school's gone. This is a time to make a statement, and I hope to be able to do that.
Thank you. Avram, same question.
First of all, I'll start by agreeing with Dave that the many things that people in all these communities, despite their differences, have in common about their security, their ability to make a living, the environment. Many people are concerned about climate change. None of these healthcare, none of these issues. I don't think there are differences in how people feel from one of these towns, one of our towns, to the next. The Elmore and Morristown have a very close relationship geographically, economically, and schools and in others. And the 2 Washington County towns are somewhat separated from that. When I ran the very first time, and I was introducing myself to people as I knocked on doors, and I would sort of finish up by saying we have 4 towns in the district, and I live in Worcester. I have to say that a lot of people in Morrisville would look at me and their face would kind of go blank, and I had to think a little bit about Worcester. Where is that? Because this is a hub, as Dave said. The economy, shopping, healthcare, employment, entertainment happens in Morrisville, and people are very centered that and actually don't get most don't get through the Washington County towns that often. But overwhelmingly, when I'm talking to people, that's not the issue. They want to know they have their issue or general. I had a long talk with someone in Woodbury about health care yesterday. I've had similar talks about health care in each of the towns in our district. I think those are overarching concerns that we all share.
Gary.
Pretty hard not to agree with both Avram and Dave. I think the communities are more alike than we think they might be. Everybody, and I don't think it makes any difference where you go. I stopped at a yard sale in Jay Peak this summer, estate sale. Stopped in there and was talking with the people. Why are you having this estate sale? Well, we can't. We're going to retire. We're at retirement age. We can't afford to retire in the state of Vermont. We're selling everything, and it looks like we're going to be moving to the backwoods of Maine, where we can afford to live. And that the same song that you get everywhere you go. People just can't afford to live here, and that's why I said earlier we got to work on our economic development and make it so people can afford to live in this state. There's people that are leaving, and there's a lot of people that are coming back. I just hired a guy that is from Boston area. He went to school at St. Michael's, went back to Boston, worked there a couple of years, and came back to Vermont because he didn't like it down there after he came up here. And so there's things that we can do to promote ourselves, but the towns, again, I agree with Dave and Avram that everybody has the same issues, whether it's schools or economics or healthcare, safety issues, transportation issues. It affects all the towns the same.
So here's an easy one you can answer in 2 minutes. One of your primary responsibilities will be to ensure the health of our state's economy. Can you share your ideas on how to keep it healthy? And we will start with Avram for this one.
The kind of economic development that I believe works best in Vermont is I'm going to say Vermont style economic development for the kinds of businesses that fit in Vermont, whether that is tourist oriented, which is obviously a very, very important part of our economy, energy, the growth in employment in the renewable energy field in Vermont has been pretty remarkable over the last few years. Solar installers and others. These are high tech and skilled jobs, good paying jobs. So I'm interested in that kind of economic development. I'm also interested in supporting Vermont's higher education more than we do now, both as a center of employment and training, but also as a means of encouraging young people to stay in the state rather than going out of state because the cost of higher education here is too high. So, in summary, my sense of economic development is on a scale that works in Vermont and fits with the kinds of things that make Vermont different and special. I worked in the energy business for a long time, and I really saw the kind of growth and creativity and significant job development that has happened in the last 10 years or so in renewable energy, and that's because Vermont supports and wants to see renewable energy, both in the public government policy, but also because that's what most Vermonters want. And so the kinds of jobs that creates are the kinds of jobs that really fit and work in Vermont.
Thank you. We'll go to Gary next.
Okay, I don't think it's only economic development that we need to do. I think we need to hold our line on spending like we did for the last 2 years. We managed to live within our means and without raising any taxes or fees, which I think is huge. There was a lot of benefits along with that. Affordable housing, there was a $35 million bond that came along with that for affordable housing. And if we can keep generating things like that, that also helps generate jobs and brings income in, higher paying jobs. But we do have to concentrate on economic development and the solar field, and I'm not so sure where the wind power is headed, but I think we probably are seeing a lot of solar going to be coming in, and there's a lot of new solar companies that have started up, which they provide high-paying jobs as well. And I'm trying to think of what other good jobs, along with recreation, needs to be promoted as well, which it is. Our bike trails, our hiking trails, our mountain bike trails brings a lot of people into the areas, especially Burke and Stowe and the entire state. And so again, there's growth to be had, and along with that comes economic development.
And Dave?
There's no way in 2 minutes I can adequately tell you how our economy is going to be improved, but I'm going to give you a couple of quick examples just to give you a little bit of the sense of how I think and address these things. The best scientist in the world just released a report in early October through the United Nations, which made it frighteningly clear that if we don't begin to reduce the heating temperature that we're going to be facing by even half a degree by the year 2030, the window by which we have to impact climate change is closing. The predictions that Vermont will have a temperature, a climate more of that of northern Pennsylvania. Our economy needs to be retooled to respond to this. A couple of quick ways in which we can do that. One, I believe strongly, we have a $4 billion state pension program. Over $369 million of that is invested in fossil fuel companies. We need to divest our state pensions and invest it thoughtfully and strategically in renewable energy projects throughout our state and set an example for the rest of the country in so doing. There will be those who say, perhaps rightly so, from an accounting standpoint, Dave, we have a fiduciary obligation to the beneficiaries of the pension. You can't play with the mix of the portfolio. To which I say, if they can't ski on the mountain in Stowe, you don't worry about fiduciary obligations. Our problems will be far greater than that. And finally, very quickly, we will, in the appropriations process, likely have what's called one-time money from special tax revenues coming in. We could double the Vermont Home Weatherization Program. We employ 150 people now. We spend $10 million a year. We weatherize close to 1,000 homes a year, saving working Vermonters $700 to $800 when we do it, and helping the environment at the same time. We need to think about how we can stimulate the economy and at the same time be thoughtful about climate change issues. Thank you.
Okay, this is a two-part question. Is the mantra of no new taxes and fees working for the state? And what alternative sources of revenue could the state pursue to fund new and existing programs, projects, and pay for personnel? And start with Gary Nolan, please.
In my opinion, the no new taxes and no new fees worked well the last 2 years. We were able to end up with a surplus at the end of last year. And again, as I stated before, that we did that without increasing taxes or fees. Well, last year ended up with the increase on the, help me out here, Dave, the non-resident non-resident property tax. That's the only fee that was raised. And but I think we held our own. We kept spending within our means. It raised, I think, 2%, about 2% increase, as opposed to like 4.3% in years past. And can you repeat the second part of that question, please?
Yeah, what alternative sources of revenue could the state pursue to fund new and existing programs, projects, and pay for personnel? That might be the tougher part.
Well, I'm not, I know we're looking in the transportation fund of looking at maybe fees on charging the electric vehicles that are now becoming more abundant on our highways, because they don't pay any, that's where most of the funding comes from to operate the infrastructure, is through the gas tax and fuel tax. And with the electric vehicles, they're not providing any tax. So I know that's being worked on, trying to figure out the best way of doing that. Some of the states I know are using a mileage tax, which is calculated on the amount of mileage traveled at your inspection periods, which in the state of Vermont is a year, so they can calculate how many miles you travel. I have not heard if they've come up with any numbers tax-wise per mile to help that out, but that is a concern of how we're going to keep our infrastructure funded with even the.
We'll have to wrap it up there.
That's fine.
So Dave, same question. No new taxes and fees. Is that working?
Well, no new taxes, no fees is an attractive, feel-good bumper sticker slogan, but it doesn't address the underlying problem. No one, I'll speak for myself, I'm not running knocking on doors so that I can have the privilege to go to Montpelier to increase your taxes. That's not what it's about for ordinary, hardworking Vermonters. But the needs we have are shocking. In Rutland City, some of the infrastructure, the sewer pipes under the ground, were put in at the time of Abraham Lincoln. We have an infrastructure that is aging. We have one of the oldest populations in the state. People are going to need help to live in their homes or go into a nursing home. How will we pay for that? We have, and I don't think you can just squeeze the existing budget to do that. No one's been able to do it in the some 40 years that I've been close to watching this. So you do have to look at additional revenues, but not on ordinary everyday folks. It's time, I think, we had a conversation about the Trump federal tax cut that took place in December. Some 10,000 tax filers in Vermont will be the recipients of some $237 million. These 10,000 taxpayers earn over $215,000 a year. They will be benefiting by $237 million. They will spend that money, and that's their right, whatever they do with it. Could we, though, take some of that money, leaving them with a good share of the rest, and strategically invest it to strengthen our state in a number of different ways? We haven't yet talked about health care. Maybe we will. But another way to generate revenue is by lowering or abating the growth of health care costs, putting money in our pockets that we'll spend in other ways and generate other economic activity. There's a full agenda here. When I just hear I don't want taxes or fees without any other plan, I just scratch my head and say, well then, how are you going to meet the needs that we have in this state for so many people? It's more complicated than that.
Thank you.
I'll start by saying I don't believe in just absolutes, that there's a sort of a one-size-fits-all statement that can fit everything that needs to happen in Vermont. We have enormous issues in Vermont about clean water. It's an issue throughout the state. It has to do with runoff. It has to do with overtaxed municipal septic systems in rainstorms and stuff. So the question is, are we going to do something about that or not? If we say we're not going to do it because we're not going to raise the money to do this, I just think that's wrong. We have to, if it has to be done, we have to figure out how to do it. I said in my opening remarks that I'm very concerned about the effect of federal cuts in healthcare, in social services, in programs for people that really need some of our help. If that happens, if Medicaid gets cut, if Medicare gets cut, then is Vermont going to try to at least do something about that or not? I think Dave raised a very important point about the federal tax cuts, so that people are, or some people are seeing a very, very large tax cuts. Can Vermont, is there room in Vermont to raise some revenue from some people to make up for the damage that is going to happen coming from the federal government? And I also want to say just a quick word about fees. Most fees are targeted at the people or businesses who either benefit from a particular service that's being provided or are in some way regulated or licensed by the state of Vermont. And I think it's appropriate to, from time to time, adjust those fees to make up for the actual cost of doing that work, for inflation and all of that. So again, I just don't, I don't like raising taxes on people, but having a sort of absolutist approach that says no, no, no is going to mean that we will end up not being able to do things as a state that most people think the state should be doing.
Thank you. So for this next question, we will start with Dave. What are some things you and the legislature can do to ensure the health of Vermont's small businesses in the 21st century?
I think one of the best things we can do, people traditionally will say, let's lower their taxes and reduce their regulations. People have been saying that for 40 years, and I don't know if they've been able to do it or if it's worked. The most important thing, I think, is by trying to put money into the pockets of Vermonters, they will spend it, and it will help our small businesses. We can do that several different ways. Can increase the earned income tax credit, which goes to 55,000 Vermonters, roughly $28 million. It will all be spent, that's historically it is. Working people, they don't save it, they spend it. Those are ways that will help small business. We can have a conversation, as controversial as it may be for some, about the minimum wage. Wages have been stagnant now for decades, really, real growth. And if we could increase the minimum wage, I'm confident those dollars would be spent and they would go back to our small businesses. So there's a lot of ways I think we can help businesses. We can also help them become more energy efficient, which will save their bottom line and help us with climate change issues.
So next we'll go to Avram, ensuring the health of small.
I think going back to something I was saying a few minutes ago, one of the ways that we can help a lot of small businesses is by really focusing and promoting Vermont-type businesses. Whether it's I talked earlier about renewable energy, another area that I've neglected to mention, but is similar in its Vermontness, is the kind of diversified agriculture that has been spreading across Vermont, not just the growing of food, but the processing and distribution of local food. So the kinds of businesses that we should be really promoting are the kinds of businesses that will thrive in Vermont because they are in Vermont, because they work best and will succeed best at the local level, and in some ways are less vulnerable to the kinds of competition that a lot of small businesses face today from it used to be the mega stores, but now it's the internet, Amazon, and others. We need to be really supporting the kinds of businesses that are can stand on their own in the kind of business environment that continues to grow in this country and compete with local and small businesses.
Yeah, to piggyback on what Avram said, is right here in Morrisville, we have a huge business, Butternut Mountain Farms, maple syrup industry. They package and sell maple syrup around the world. And the other day, a month ago, we all visited a farm in Worcester, 37 acres of side hill like this, and a young couple and their 5-year-old son is out there working on that, and they've been at it for 4 or 5 years now, and they're getting to the point where they're making a living doing it. So there's only what they told us, one of the people is going to have to work out this winter instead of both of them. They're able to grow through their greenhouses and supply restaurants in the Montpelier area. So that's going to enable one of them to stay at home, and the other to work out and maintain their insurance benefits, which is another huge problem. So yes, I agree that there's a lot of small businesses, and especially right here in Morrisville, Manufacturing Solutions came up with a brainstorm of just putting together different products for different companies so that they didn't have to pay overtime or they didn't have to pay warehouse space to handle it. So, I mean, I don't know how many square feet he's got over there now, but he's just adding on. We approved it through the DRBs, adding on another 61,000 square feet of plant over there. So there's a lot of stuff happening in different sectors than what you would historically think that they would grow in.
Okay, Avram, you start this one. How do you tackle the dilemma of rising school costs in the face of declining school population in Vermont?
It is a problem. I live in Worcester. It's a small school that, as was said earlier, I think Dave said it, is more than just a school. It's in a very small town. It's a critical aspect. If the school closes, we don't have anywhere to hold town meeting. It's a major piece of the town. So I do believe, and I'll talk about my knowledge of Worcester and the supervisory union that we are in, along with Middlesex and the other towns that send students to Union 32 High School. There are instances where some of these schools, in my opinion, do need to be considering merging their governance and organizational structures as a way of preserving their small schools, not closing their small schools, because I think the pressure to close will be even worse if they don't do anything. I do think that schools, and that includes the school boards, union, and everyone else, needs to look at the number of employees, teachers, and others per pupil. However, I'm strongly opposed to a one-size-fits-all formula for that, because that penalizes small and rural schools where the cost per person of everything is higher. So I do think that it is state government's role and the legislature's role to continue to, I'm going to say, apply pressure to say things need to happen, to give incentives for things happening, but also not to, I think, as Dave said earlier, impose one-size-fits-all arbitrary kind of formulas and mandates.
Thank you. So we'll go to Gary next.
Thank you. I think schools are a very integral part of any community, and without the school, it's tough for a community to have a hub to gather around. And I think the town should have more governance over the schools than they do currently. The small schools are, take Worcester School, for example, they, at this point, have no debt in their school system. And what's going to happen if they get forced to go with U32? Are they going to be forced to take on some of the debt that all the other schools have? I think Worcester and Calais are the two schools in that district that don't have any debt out of the 5 schools that belong to U32. And are they going to have to absorb some of that debt? Which, the way I understand it, they will. And it's not fair to those schools to have to do that, or those towns to have to absorb that, is my opinion. And I would fight for that. And I agree that governance is, the amount of staff per pupil, I believe, needs to be addressed. I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's, you have to evaluate the students that you have in your school, and you figure out what staff you need to help these kids get through school. I know they all have different needs. I've got grandkids. They have different needs. One needs a lot of extra help. Another one is an honor student. So, yeah, the school funding needs to be addressed, and I am not smart enough to figure it out, and I'm not sure that anybody is, to be honest with you.
I agree. Several quick things. We passed a bill this year in the legislature that the governor signed into law addressing special education costs. And the estimate is that it will save upwards of $20 to $40 million over 3 to 5 year period, and perhaps more. Vermont hired some consultants to come in and work with schools on their reading programs. And instead of paraeducators who work very hard and do a good job working with students on their reading, they changed the model around to hire teachers who are trained in reading to lead that effort to strengthen children, and they've come up with some significant results and able to save costs at the same time. We need to watch it closely, because the last thing we want to do is to hurt children who have special needs so that they can succeed, but there's real promise in that. The other thing, the Teachers Association agreed to a model of a statewide insurance contract, and we believe there might be savings there by pooling dollars together. That was a big move, I think, for the teachers to do that, because they had previously been very worried about it. I think there can be, if carefully negotiated, economy of scales that will help with that. And then finally, we need to, though it's not quite related to this question, have a conversation about how we pay for our schools. I think that will have a matter on people, a direct impact. I believe I'm an advocate of shifting for the residential cost by residents as a home up in 2 acres to an income tax as opposed to a property tax. I've always questioned whether what a person's property had to do with their ability to pay. Their income does, but not necessarily whether they're on a homestead that overlooks an incredible valley vista or have a nice lake in their community.
So what do you think can be done to retain or attract young people and young families to stay or to live in this area? We'll start with Gary.
Well, as I stated earlier, I just hired a gentleman from the Boston area, and he come here just because of the Vermont environment. I don't know how big a sale you can put on that to to entice people to come here. Our education systems are fantastic. University of Vermont, the Northern Vermont University are as good as any, I think there is. And as far as jobs, again, I think jobs are coming. The economy has been pretty good. A lot of building going on, and people are hollering for help every day. I noticed in the Star Reporter that some of the businesses down there have to relax their hours because they don't have help enough to be able to get through the day. So there's plenty of jobs out there for people that can work and want to work. Although it may not be the highest paying jobs in the world, but I know, as I alluded to before, our manufacturing solutions over here, they're busing people in from Chittenden County because they can't find enough people here to work. So there's things to do, and I'm not sure if I know MSI has increased their wage scale. I think most of they start at close to $15 an hour now to get people to come to work there. So I think that's probably first and foremost, is to just keep the economy growing and building going on, and that brings people in from around different areas and helps support the small businesses and the local mom and pop stores and things.
Thank you. Dave, how can we retain and attract young people to live in this area?
I think we have to try to figure out how to make ourselves different than other states so that people will want to come and so that people will want to stay. How do we make our state unique? A couple of quick things. If we could make a significant investment in early childhood, I think that would make a big difference for young families. If we said for folks up to 250% of the poverty level, your early childhood care is covered, I think young families would want to be a part of the Vermont landscape. Today they pay on average of upwards of $300 a week for infant care. You take the cost of that child care, cost of operating a car, cost of renting or paying for a home, it's unbearable for many young families. We made it, in another respect, we made a distinction this year, and we said that we're going to pay for the higher education at the state colleges for Vermont National Guardsmen. All right, Gary? I think what
Right.
was, yes, yeah. Well, we made a selective decision to reward our Guards members with that. Well, what if we said, okay, we did the Guards, now do we do nurses? Or I'm using it as an example. It may be a different profession. Do we say we're going to target these kinds of investments to encourage people to say, I want to go to Vermont. You know, I'll get my education paid for and I have to work there for 6 years in payment of it, but hopefully I'll take root and become part of the Vermont society as that happens. We need to have a conversation, I think, again, to make ourselves different and to add value of paid family leave. The bill that we passed that failed, that was vetoed, it would have increased the cost to a working Vermonter who makes minimum wage by approximately 60 cents a week. They would have been able to get some help staying at home, caring for dying parents who are at the end of their lives, or to take care of their children who are new to this earth. Those are important investments to try to improve the quality of Vermont, and there's other ways too, I think we can do that.
I have to admit, I always feel a little bit uncomfortable because everyone is always talking about young people leaving Vermont, and our two kids who are in their 40s now both went away for periods of time to college and both ended up in Vermont living very close to us with very good jobs, each of them. But school and college has a lot to do with it. A lot of people leave home where they grew up and go somewhere else to college. A lot of those people end up putting down roots where they went to school. That happens with people who come to Vermont for school. It happened to me. And it happens for young people who leave Vermont to go to school for whatever reason somewhere else and end up staying and liking where they ended up in school. I mentioned earlier, and I do think this is a real problem, which is how the amount of support we give to higher education is really getting, I'm going to say, kind of shameful. I agree on the for the early childhood issue that Dave said, but a generation or two ago, Vermont was in the middle of the country in terms of the share of higher education costs that was part of the state budget as opposed to tuition. Now we're 48th in the country. So that's a disincentive for Vermonters to young Vermonters to stay here, and once they leave, there is a chance that they will settle where they ended up going. That's a huge difference to make up, and it's not something we could do overnight. But the kind of ideas that Dave suggested of incrementally, in one way or another, starting to recognize that we are not supporting higher education the way we should be, I think we probably need to bite the bullet on that.
Thank you. So I think we'll ask one more question, and then we'll open it up for the audience, and then we'll take a short break before the next one. But yeah, one more question from us.
I know you all want to talk about healthcare. There's been a lot of changes in healthcare in the last 5-6 years. How do we as a state get a handle on the increasing cost of healthcare, and what should the state's role look like in delivering healthcare to Vermonters? Start with Dave Yacovone.
I didn't hear that.
How do we get a handle on the increasing cost of healthcare in Vermont, and what should the state's role look like in delivering it? We'll start with Dave, actually.
With me? Mm-hmm. You sure?
I can ask again after.
Perfect question.
Perfect. Imagine you're all physicians. We're all physicians in this room. And our compensation is based on on our volume, how many patients we see a day. In fact, Tommy, our employer, says you got to see at least 2.86 patients an hour. It's almost 3 an hour, so it's less than a 20-minute visit. In order to pay the lights and to pay you your bonus, and you've got to reach that and do good quality. So we're processing people. It's fee for service, process. And maybe you don't get to look at the whole problem of the patient, but the specific thing. I've got this rash on my back, when actually there's something more than that going on. How do we change from a fee for service to instead a system that rewards quality that's population based? Take all the dollars in the Lamoille Valley, give them to an entity that's composed of citizens and providers, and say, manage this care to keep everybody well. It's entirely different. Under that scenario, the best hospital bed is an empty hospital bed. The dollars will stay in the community. The experts say that one of the leading drivers of healthcare spending are what's called the social determinants of health. And that's hunger, housing, hopelessness. It's called poverty. 15 to 20% of the costs are driven by people in poverty who struggle just paying the bills and surviving, let alone to be able to take care of themselves or get access to the health care that they need. Bankruptcy today, the leading cause of bankruptcy in Vermont are health care costs. We need to rethink how we do what we do. There's an old saying, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. We can't flip a switch and change this overnight, but we can do something called an all-payer waiver, which Vermont has, begin to lay the groundwork to change this dynamic, to keep us healthy, and to invest in our communities the resources to do that instead of just rewarding high volume. People take courses on this, let alone 2 minutes, but that's... Did
you need that again, Avram, or did you get the gist of it?
I'm going to start by saying that this is an issue that has been I've been thinking about for a very long time. Because of my own personal experiences as a patient, and before that, and in the 2 years I served on the healthcare committee, really, I learned a lot, but I wasn't surprised by what I was learning, and part of that is there's a huge gulf, a separation between what healthcare actually costs to provide and how we pay for it, and the how we pay for it is why it costs so much. In large part. Vermont, although I strongly believe that as a nation we should be moving towards a Medicare for all system. Medicare is a huge government program that runs at lower administrative costs than insurance companies do. The people who are served by it, like I have been for the last 2 years, are happy with the benefit and happy with the customer service. We're not going to see that happen anytime real soon at the national level, and it's not something Vermont can do on its own for a number of reasons. But when I served on the healthcare committee was when we put out a bill that passed that started the wheels in motion to what Dave was just talking about getting away from the fee-for-service way that we pay for now, which is very, very expensive. I asked a lot of questions, both of insurance executives and lobbyists and the hospital executives and lobbyists in my time there. It made a lot of them sweat. I kind of enjoyed it. But what you should know, if you get your explanation of benefits from your insurance company, from Blue Cross Blue Shield, let's say, and it says, this is what we were billed, this is what we paid, this is how much you saved, everybody knows that those are fake numbers. What they were billed is not a real number, and I got people to in the business to admit that. So we really need to turn around the how we pay for by making it not generated by how many x-rays and how many services and how many nights in the hospital and et cetera, but on what we're actually delivering to people, which is health.
Thank you, Avram. And Gary, do you remember the question?
Boy, I don't know if I can add a whole lot to either one of those. Healthcare is definitely out of control, cost-wise. And it doesn't make any difference whether you're going to the eye doctor or the dentist or you're going to your physician. And like Avram says, explanation of benefits, you know darn well that, you know, you get a bill for pharmacy for $27 for a $3 worth of B12. You know, the doctors in the offices are getting paid probably more than they should be. I don't know where all the money goes that they claim that they don't get. Because my primary care doctor just retired, and I had to find another one, and that's not an easy task to find a new doctor, because they're not taking, most of them aren't taking any new patients. And again, there's got to be a better way of paying for our health care. And like I say, I'm not sure that I know how to be able to come up with that answer. It's going to take a long time. It didn't get there overnight, and it's not going to be cured overnight. It's works in progress, and I think the healthcare committees and the different committees that address it in the legislature are up to the task, and we'll be getting some. I know that's a huge issue this year coming up, and I know we'll be getting some results of some way, shape, or form this year.
Yeah, thank you so much. Does anyone from the audience have any questions that they would like to ask? Yes.
I have one.
We do have a microphone up here, but
Oh,
everyone
that's
can hear
okay.
you.
What are your thoughts about the supervisory unions? And I work in a small school. I work in Wolcott, and our supervisory union, there seems to be quite a bit of money at the top there, and quite a few people in the supervisory union that are making quite a bit of money, and we now have a CFO that is now working in accordance with our superintendent, and there seems to be a lot of money that is in a lot of the supervisory unions, and I'm just wondering if we maybe need as many of them as we have.
Who wants to take a shot at that first, and then we'll go on down the line.
I'll jump in. I don't think we need 60 some odd supervisory unions. I think it's a smaller number. And I think we can keep local governance at the same time. I'm not talking about taking 25 school boards and having one mega board and losing a voice at the local level. I'm talking about trying to realign the administrative cost and to re-engineer those differently. I realize professionals are expensive and you're competing with certain areas, but I don't think we need all the administration we're paying for. And I do think, I don't know what the right number is, but I do think some consolidation is needed. I think we have 12 tech centers with 12 regional administrators. I don't know if 12 is the right number, but I'd like to try to get to that thoughtfully over time.
Avram?
Okay, I'm not going to comment specifically on that supervisory union because I don't live in that area, and but
I brought that one up.
no, but I think you were speaking more generally. I think I agree that we need to keep pushing on finding efficiencies at, I'm going to say, at the adult level of the, that's the administration and all of that, I think, can be consolidated more than it is, so that if someone is getting paid that kind of a salary and that they actually have more responsibility over more staff and more students than the supervisory unions we have now. I'm not. I mean, again, it's focusing not on the education and the services to students, but it's on the sort of all of the adult activity that goes on that is mostly needed, but we need to push on whether we really need as many people doing it.
Gary, do you have any words on that?
Yeah, I think we're experiencing that right here in our own district. We got two supervisory unions that are 4 miles apart, Lamoille South and Lamoille North. And I'm not exactly sure what the total number of students is, but I am hard pressed to believe that one superintendent couldn't handle both districts, and one CFO and one of each should be able to, with maybe an additional assistant or something that had a lower pay grade. But I agree that I think there's a lot more money spent on upper echelon supervisory unions than needs to be. Matter of fact, I talked with a teacher from Hardwick 3-4 months ago. He came from California. He says, I don't understand this. He said, we have one superintendent in one of the districts in California that handle as many students as you have in half the state here. So he was kind of dumbfounded at all the supervisory unions that we have, and And I'd like to see, like Dave, the supervisory unions match the amount of tech centers, and I think the tech centers are way underused.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, miss.
I do a lot of volunteer work for Meals on Wheels, and I know how much work goes into the work at Meals on Wheels and how many people work hard and how many volunteers there are. But I also know that funding gets cut for these programs. Meals on Wheels in particular sticks out, and with our baby boomers, myself included, coming along, there's going to be a greater need for these meals to be supplied for the seniors. How do you think you would go about trying to bring more money in for this institution? And that's just an example, but I'm using Meals on Wheels as an example, but certainly any of our existing for the elderly or any program. But I particularly am interested in Meals on Wheels.
A minute each. Anyone who wants to take that?
I'd be glad to. There's a program called Choices for Care. Serves about 5,000 people in Vermont, 2,500 in the nursing home and 2,500 in the community. We can amend that program, which is funded primarily by Medicaid, the federal government, and we can include Meals on Wheels in that program. So the federal government picks up a share and covers the cost of the meal, freeing up the dollars that are going for those folks to serve other people or to strengthen the system. We did the analysis, and if you can save statewide 20 people from going into the nursing home, it'll pay for a significant increase in the program. And so I'm talking about growing our own food, so to speak, getting the savings from the inside to redeploy. Having said that, though, this is, letting senior citizens go hungry is not the Vermont I think any of us want to be a part of. It has to be a priority, and it has to be a budget decision, and we need to ask candidates, how are you going to fund it? Which I guess is what you're doing.
I think you just answered that question.
Anyone else? Avram?
Yeah. I'll start by saying that in the late 1970s and early 1980s, I got my start in public transportation before I was running an agency. As a van driver, picking up people, bringing them to seniors and bringing them to meal sites, and then taking the meals from the meal site and going and delivering them to people at home. A program like that, which is so dependent on volunteers in the community, which is a good thing for a whole lot of reasons, nevertheless costs money, and so I've seen, both with this program as well as many other community-based organizations where basically they've been level funded for extended periods of time, and that is in effect a funding cut. And so I don't think we can keep doing that. So I think the level of support needs to be maintained to recognize that costs do go up over time, and if you don't meet those increased costs, then you're cutting the program. At the same time, if there are creative ways of leveraging funding, nutrition-based funding, such as the one Dave mentioned. I'm not familiar with that one, but there are others as well. During my time when I served, I had discussions with Council on Aging directors about what public funds pay for in terms of nutrition for older people and what it doesn't pay for. Didn't seem to make sense to me. So I think the main thing, though, is that we can't expect programs to maintain themselves without damage if we don't keep up with the cost of actually operating them.
And Gary, do you want to take your shot at that?
Sure. Yeah, my wife from time to time works for Meals on Wheels. She delivers meals around when she has time, when she can get off from work. And I as well have volunteered through Rotary. Rotary spent some time at Meals on Wheels in the years past. And yeah, I'm not familiar, like Dave is, being on appropriations with the type of funding that's available. But I do agree that it needs to be addressed, and we can't keep level funding these different agencies, not just Meals on Wheels, but there's a lot of other super important things that we need to pay attention to in our aging population. And there doesn't seem to be, unless we can figure out a way to keep the young people here or entice young people to come, that doesn't seem to be any end in sight of the older generation taking over the younger generation here. So, yeah, we need to address the funding issues in those arenas.
So at this point, I think we'll do closing statements, then we'll take a short couple minutes break, reset for the next one. So, candidates, would you like to decide who wants to make their first closing statement? Or I can decide. Or you don't have to.
I'll just start by saying I really enjoyed the last couple of years as representing people from our district. Morrisville, Elmore, Worcester, and Woodbury, and going door to door, you certainly get a lot of input. Some good, some maybe not so good, but you have to take it all in stride. As my introductory bio said, I've been on the Development Review Board here. I've been chair for a quarter of a century now, and it's really helped me in my role as representative, because I've been able to have 25 years of listening to all sides of an issue before you make a informative decision. And it's amazing how many times things come up in legislature where you really have to pay attention to all different sides of the issue. At first light, a bill comes across through your committee and you think it's a no-brainer, should go, and then the chairperson says, well, we better take testimony from so-and-so, and you get people in there and, well, maybe this isn't such a good idea after all. So I think that's why it's a great opportunity to serve and to give back to the communities that you've been fortunate enough to work in for these last few years. Say I've worked at Menage Corporation for 43 years and still working full-time. But it's been a pleasure to serve, and I'd like to go back and see if we can keep things going.
Who do you want to go next?
Tell us. Okay. If you pick up one of my campaign cards, which are over there in the corner, you'll see on one side that there's a picture of me looking serious, talking on the phone to somebody. And I posed for that picture, and I'm wearing a tie in that picture. And I realized when we were doing that picture that was the first time I had put on a tie since the legislative session that I served in. So I wondered, why am I doing this, and put on a jacket and tie and go to the State House again. It is in Vermont, despite some of the controversies in the last session in Vermont. It is a place where people do find common ground, do find agreement. And when I sat on the healthcare committee, For 2 years, I sat next to one of the most conservative Republicans in the House. We did not disagree. We did not agree on most things. We got along. We found that we had agreement based in part on our own personal experience about the extortionary pharmaceutical pricing that goes on. And so when the two of us stood up to speak and present a bill on the floor, people took notice of that and said, well, if he supports it and he supports it, it must be okay to vote for this bill. That happens in Vermont. It's not happening much in the rest of the country, and I would look forward to serving again to be a part of that and to work on the issues that I'm pretty passionate about. And those include healthcare, those include renewable energy and energy conservation, the environment, and economic and social justice.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you, News and Citizen, Stowe Reporter, and the Green Mountain Cable folks for making this available to others. I wonder what the children of today will say 30 years from now about us. Will they thank us for the clean water they drink? Will they feel blessed for the pure air they breathe and the open spaces we preserved? Or will they shake their heads and wonder why we look the other way? I feel an obligation to do my darndest to try to leave this place better than I found it. I don't have all the answers. I don't have a formula to that, but I have a passion to serve others, and that's the view I take. Try to make Vermont a better place for those who come behind us. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for listening and for participating. So we'll take about a 5-minute break to reset, and then we will start part 2 for the Lamoille 2 debate.